All right, so first off, I just personally want to thank you very much for being here. It's an amazing opportunity for me, and I would assume for a lot of people here as well. I would like to secondly congratulate you on your whole fatherhood. You know, the newborn, that's.
Thank you.
And so going off of that, I would just like to know, you being a husband, a father, and a big political figure, it's like, how do you cope with, like, making all of those things important in your life?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's not a lot of sleep, but it's a lot of fun. 2 months today. That's just amazing. So we're very happy about that. And so thank you. And I'll tell you what, it radicalizes you. It does. If you think you're a conservative before parenthood, holy moly. That's why I can't understand. I cannot understand liberal parents. At this point, I have nothing in common with you. Liberal young people that are single, you want to burn the world down, you're miserable, and do weed all day, fine. I sort of understand. You have a being that you are now responsible for, and you want to commit civilizational arson, nothing in common with you. So anyway, that's a separate thing. So you mentioned a lot, which is, I'm a big fan of Aristotle. Aristotle talked about a hierarchy of the good. When you have a lot going on, this is a good rule for young people. You got to make a hierarchy of what matters most, and you got to prioritize that thing over other things, which means, by definition, other things are going to slip aside. And then kind of part of marriage and also fatherhood, of which I'm very new at, but learning very quickly, but marriage a year and a half, you realize it's not all about you. And this is one of the great, I hate the self-love movement. I hate the self-esteem movement. It's done so much damage. I think it's one of the great, philosophical carcinogens in our society in so many different ways. I saw this sign the other day. They said, it's your imperfections that make you perfect. And I thought to myself, I said, well, then therefore, by definition, the more imperfections you have, the better you are? Or my favorite one is, the world is better because you're in it. Now, that might sound like a good message, but in reality, it should be a question. Is the world better because you're in it? Right? It should, and so it should be a question. Has the world become a better place because of you? Now, so the idea of a hierarchy of what matters most is not taught a lot to our kids. There's a big lie out there that you could have it all. And that's not true. You can't. You have to make sacrifices. You could still do a lot. You could still run a business and you could still do things, but you have to make time for what matters most, which the first most important thing is your relationship with God. That comes above all. And then relationship with your wife, and then your child. You notice I put it in that order. That's biblical, by the way. And getting a lot of great advice from people like Prager and Tucker and so many other great people, is that the marriage comes first and then children come first, which is not agreed upon in every circle, but at least that's how we're practicing it. And then you can have other things like jobs and all that, jobs and that. But I think one of the reasons why we have such a depressed generation, suicidal generation, we have such an anxious generation, a medicated generation, is they're thinking about themselves all the time. I believe a people that is not dedicated to service is a very depressed people. It's not always about you. Sometimes you have to do stuff you don't like because it's going to benefit somebody else. By the way, we just know that scientifically you're a happier person because of that. We know that, regardless of the spiritual implications or the moral implications. And so we have an entire generation that's always asked, like, how do you feel? How do you feel about that? It's actually quite irrelevant. It matters more about what you're doing. And here's a thought-provoking thing for you. Generally, what you do should dictate how you feel, not how you feel with what you do. That's a good general rule to tell a young person. Another good rule for life, which is self-control is a lot more important than self-esteem. But we do the opposite. Thank you. Thanks. Go ahead.
Welcome to Kansas City. I just want.
Thank you.
I'm a big fan, and we're glad you're here. My question is, have you tried our barbecue?
I did, and it's awesome. Very impressed. Lived up to the hype, I got to tell you. For years, I heard Texas versus Kansas City, Texas versus Kansas City. It's very, very good. I'm not going to tell you who's better, but it's very, very good.
That was going to be my follow-up question.
Oh, yeah, is that right? I take the fifth.
Okay.
Thank you.
I am a sophomore here in credits, but first year, actually on campus. And so being a first year student, I'm required to take this first semester experience class. And so thanks, yeah. So right now, our unit is about social justice, and I've got this assignment due on later this week. And so one of the questions is, what does social justice mean to you, and what are important components of social justice? So how do I go about completing this assignment while still maintaining my conservative and Christian values?
What kind of grade do you want to get in the class? No, I'm very serious.
I would, college education is a very important part of me, but I wouldn't let that supersede my political or religious values.
So you developed a hierarchy. That's what you just did, right? So you just said this matters more than that. And so if you want to go after it, you could say, look, I believe in the ancient view of justice that built the West. I don't believe in environmental justice or racial justice or social justice. And you could go straight into how Aristotle defined justice. It is the messiest of all the virtues, but one of the most necessary. And it's very simple, giving man to what is due. Social justice is not that. Social justice is mass redistribution based on qualities of things people can't change. So justice has a preference on human agency and action. You did this, you get that. Social justice is you look like this, therefore this should happen to you. So social justice, and I'm generalizing and people can disagree with it throughout, but this is approximately right. Social justice is a preference on structures and I think arbitrary iniquities. Saying you're a person of color, therefore you deserve reparations. Of course, they can't answer a single question in response to, okay, what if someone is half black and half white? How are they going to get reparations exactly? Or why is it that someone who's never owned slaves, that didn't know someone that owned slaves, that wasn't related to someone that owned slaves, has to pay money to somebody who we can't even prove whether or not they're a descendant of slaves? Why is that the case exactly? Oh, because of the melanin content. That's where social justice leads you. So then I would respond, again, depending on what kind of grade you want to get, is say, liberty matters a lot more to me than social justice. And then you might have to retake the course at a different time. So God bless you.
Hello. So from your talk, I gathered that a big problem you have is the government representing the will of the people, and you believe it should do a better job at that, correct? If you say that, how can you support Donald Trump when he has lost the popular vote twice?
Okay. Because we don't elect presidents using the popular vote. No, it's okay. You got to follow up. Okay. Give her a follow-up.
Yes, but you said you have an issue with the government not representing the will of the people. So if you personally have an issue with that, then why do you support him if that is not the will of the people? Right.
So will and majority are two different things. Right? So are we a democracy? You're not here. Are we a democracy?
Should we be?
No, but are we?
Why should we not be? Is that not a core fundamental point of American society?
No. Has democracy appeared anywhere in the Constitution?
I mean, that is genuinely a valid point. However, your point of the government should represent the people, why is it that democracy is not in the Constitution, or why is it that you believe that the will of the majority is not as important as the will of the minority if your issue specifically is the government should represent the people better?
Good question. So we believe in the Electoral College. Why? Because Kansas deserves a voice. Because Missouri deserves a voice. And it's the most important way I could distill it is the union we have is the states created it, the federal government didn't create it. So the kind of price of admission is every state gets 2 senators, congressmen based on population, and then electoral votes based on that population. So you kind of get a mix of both. And it's also this tension. And I would ask the question, if we abolished the Electoral College, do you think that the needs, wants, and interests of Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, North, South Dakota, Montana would be taken as seriously as New York and California? That would be my question to you.
Do you believe that some citizens are more valuable than others? Because in our current system, some people's votes hold more sway than others, because people in like Wyoming who have smaller populations have more say than places like here in Missouri and Kansas. Why is this acceptable if it's, again, your issue is the will of the people?
Because we're not a democracy. So a democracy is simple majoritarianism. So let me give you an example. In a democracy, by up or down vote, you could say, I want to enslave black people. A constitutional republic says, Now you're going to have to go through a process to do that. So let me ask you a question. Do you think the majority of the will of the people could ever be wrong?
Yes.
Okay. So the founding fathers knew it could almost assuredly be wrong, right? So the system of a republic versus a democracy is it has to be slow and arduous and intentional because it has a preference on liberty, right, not on free stuff. And so over a period of time, how do you best protect liberty? Well, you got to spread over all the representation over space and time, right? So you do it over a lot of states, a lot of square miles, a lot of acreage, and it takes a lot of time to take over the federal government, right? You have to win an election, and then an election, and an election. It's not impossible. We eradicated slavery. We gave women the right to vote. So it's possible to get change done. But the founding fathers were less concerned about getting progress done really quickly, and they were more concerned with the government doing bad stuff too quickly. Does that make sense?
But that is not what you said. You said that your specific problem is the government does not do the will of the people. Why is it that your will and what you want is more important than that of the majority?
Well, it's not my will, it's the framers and the system we have. But to answer your question, I believe the best way to determine the will of the people is through states' rights and states' directives. If Kansas wants to say, hey, we can have decentralized gun laws or school choice, God bless Kansas. And so the question is not, is national will also versus state will, right? So we have to recognize that the values of someone in Kansas, in Manhattan, Kansas, is a lot different than the values of someone in Manhattan, New York. It's a lot different. And so through a democracy, it'd say, hey, the people of New York City want to have firearms confiscated. I don't think that dog's going to hunt in Manhattan, Kansas. Well, Kansas State University, so I don't know. But it allows, answer your question, it allows people that disagree with one another to live in the same nation. You see, a Republican-style government, small r, allows people that might agree on almost nothing to still engage in self-government while still having a national project to participate in. So to clarify it even more, it is a question of the consent to the governed. If it was just a democracy, it would be an up or down vote on every single person, and that's it. The Founding Fathers saw that fail time and time again. Athenian democracy. People just vote themselves stuff. So they said, we have to have some sort of system that realizes that if men were angels, government would not be necessary, but men are not angels, so we got to create some sort of government. Federalist 51, as Madison said. So we got to figure this out. So government is necessary, but we don't want to have too big a government, and people are just going to vote themselves stuff all the time. So how do we do that? Well, local is better than national, but you got to have some sort of a national influence. And so they created the great balance between Jeffersonian and Hamiltonian type philosophy, as we know, is the U.S. Constitution. And the one thing they all agreed on, though, is human nature. They knew that absolute power corrupts absolutely and that people were likely to abuse it. So I would just kind of counter by saying the will of the people can be best expressed through a multi-state project. For example, I believe an election is much healthier and much more representative by requiring candidates to go to Iowa, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and not just spending time on the coast. Because you know why? It might seem as if, oh, we don't need those flyover states. We don't need them. First of all, that's arrogant, prideful, and wrong. How exactly are you going to feed your family, and where do you think the breadbasket of the world comes from? The founders saw ahead, and final thing I'll say is this, is that it was Hamilton or it was Madison that said, we cannot have the tyranny of the cities over the farmers. And that's built into our system. Thank you for being here tonight. I got to get to the next question. Thank you.
So you believe your vote should be more important than others?
No, I don't. In fact, if you want, first of all, the way you do senators is egalitarian. The way you do Congress people is representative population. And let me just reinforce this, which, again, California still has more electoral votes than Kansas. So there is a precedent, there is a weight on population. It's just done in the context of that every state gets a voice. For example, Kansas, South Dakota, Oklahoma don't get merged in just because they all look the same from an airplane you're flying by. It's a state with states' rights, its own government, its own constitution. So to push back, it's not as if population means nothing. Is that population is factored in to a national project. And I'll just say one final thing on states. You go through COVID, Europe, they had one decree. Every part of Germany, Belgium, France did the same thing. These laboratories of democracy that continually happened keep us freer. and you have a state rights project or you have a national project, the states' rights project has kept us freer, has kept people more prosperous, because if you don't like your government, you're closer to it and you can make changes and adjustments. Thank you. Got to get to the next question. Thank you. Got to get to the, I'm sorry. I got to get to the, thank you. Thank you. I got to get to the next question.
Why are some votes more important?
I heard you out. Thank you very much.
Answer the question.
That's not the question.
Answering my question.
More
Why
vote.
are some votes more important than others?
So, hey, do you live in Kansas or Missouri?
It doesn't matter. Why are
Because guess what? In Kansas, you actually have a bigger voice than some people in California, hilariously. Because states have rights. Because
why is the individual less important?
I got to get to the next question, but I don't think you're hearing what I'm saying. Thank you very much.
You cannot justify your mentality.
Thank you very much. We got to get to the next question.
So I'm on the Kansas side, and as you're aware, we just recently lost in a big abortion amendment. And so besides it being written very poorly, in my opinion, there's a lot of outside media, outside money to get that vote swayed to a no and not a yes. Could you speak to that and any advice for us pro-lifers to, protect the unborn? Thank you.
Yeah, keep the fight, first of all. Look, I think a couple dynamics with this. I think it was poorly written. I think there was a lot of confusion. I asked my Kansas audience, and I got a lot of emails of people that said they voted correctly, but a lot of their friends were confused. I know probably some of you on the Kansas side probably agree it was poorly written. That's number one. Number two, I think there was a massive amount of kind of Democrat out-of-state money and left-wing money post-Dobbs. But number three is something that I say as someone who's 100% pro-life and talk about it, and I speak at pro-life centers all the time, is I don't think parts of the conservative movement are as pro-life as we think they are. And that's not an accusation. Maybe you're in the audience and that might be your position. That's fine. But I'm also, I refuse to live under this delusion that everyone on the right is 100% pro-life. That's not true. And so politics is one thing. We got a lot of work to do to explain what it means to be a human being, when human life begins, and why those human beings are necessary and worthy of protection. Now, I could be wrong. We're going to learn a lot in the pro-life movement in the next couple weeks. Both Kentucky and Montana have very similar measures up. If they fail there, we're going to learn even more. And so it should be kind of instructive to us of how pro-life actually are the states that we live in. And we got a lot of work to do. And I think there's a lot of fear-mongering. There's a lot of, I think bad moral teaching that comes alongside of it. But look how far the pro-life movement has come. A loss in Kansas because of a ballot referendum, that's small. You guys will get reorganized. You guys will lick your wounds. You guys will figure it out. We got Roe versus Wade repealed. I mean, come on. That's huge. And so we got a lot of work to do. I think we got a lot of explaining to do, a lot of persuading to do, a lot of persistence. But I'm optimistic, man. I really am. And I want to say that the pro-life movement needs to, of course, talk about solutions and adoption and creating a culture of life and making it easier to adopt in the correct way with the right clearinghouses so that bad people don't adopt kids and abuse them. That's a very serious concern, which was the good intent behind the bad policy that made the adoptive adoptive process, I should say, so bureaucratic and cumbersome. Good intention ended up being a multi-year just thicket. I know some of you have adopted, and it's very difficult, right? I don't know how it is in Kansas, but I know in most states it's very, very hard, very bureaucratic, very arduous. I think if you run it through the church, it's one of the best ways to do it, and I think it's a way to streamline it and have a clearinghouse. So keep the fight. It is the fight that I think will define all the others, but we've made so much progress. We were told our whole life that it's inevitable that everyone's going to support abortion. Now even the media admits it's a 50-50 issue. You understand how big of a deal that is? Do you know by public opinion polls we are noticeably more pro-life than we were 20 years ago? That's awesome. And so at this trajectory, we're going to have even more victories. God bless you, man. Appreciate it.
And I'm from Texas, and then Kansas City barbecue is better.
Okay, all right.
Hey, Charlie.
Hi.
So I think this might be more of a point of clarification than a legitimate disagreement. So you started off your talk by saying that you oppose science insofar as it stands in the way of nature or it sort of rewrites nature, right? Is that like an accurate representation of your point? Or
It can cause a lot of damage, and not done under the proper moral framework. It's been one of the great killers of modern humanity. Obvious with, there's been phenomenal breakthroughs in modern medicine. But continue with your question. So.
That was actually my question,
Oh,
actually.
okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you could take, for example, so let's kind of just go back to how science was administered through things that we take for granted, right? So, for example, Sir Isaac Newton, right? Force equals mass times acceleration. An object at rest will stay at rest. For every action is equal and opposite reaction, right? He was a phenomenal Christian, wrote a lot about biblical prophecy, and looked at nature as a way to explore God's creation for an intended purpose. And so it's all a question of what is the intent, right? So I'll give you a great example. If the intent is to allow human beings to flourish, then I'm all for it. What's an example of that? How about a cesarean section? What an awesome medical breakthrough over the last 100 years. A cesarean section is, of course, a C-section. Without getting too graphic, it's a way through medical intervention and progress to save human life with that intended purpose. Now, obviously, you have to have an incision. You have to be able to, have the proper medication so that, the woman doesn't feel it. It's the most common medical procedure now done in America today. And so I'm all for scientific breakthroughs and progress, but that's with the intent of saving a human life, right? Properly administered, a C-section is life-giving, right? When you look at other things, there is no life-giving nature to abortion. So you look at two very complex surgical procedures. One's an abortion, one's a cesarean section. Both require a doctor, they require, medication, they require breakthroughs, but they have two completely different moral premises. One to give life and one to take life away. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And speaking of abortion, I did have a sort of separate question,
Sure.
if you don't mind. Yeah. So you sort of touched on abortion from a moral or philosophical standpoint in your talk. From a political or cultural standpoint, how do you see the debate playing out in the mid to long term? Who do you think wins in the long term?
That's a smart question. I've given this advice to conservatives, which is you have to be realistic about it. In certain states, in certain areas, it's not a winning issue. Maybe in a longer period of time, we could do our work and we could persuade people. But if you're trying to get political power or win an election, you got to be realistic about whether or not you think that is going to win people over. And so some people say, Charlie, you should talk about the issue all the time. Well, then how are you ever going to get political power to actually fix the issue, right? I mean, at some point, you got to be prudent about this. But I think the left is going to see a surge of support. I think that's going to happen. They're going to see a lot of money come in, a lot more activists. And then I think we as pro-lifers are going to get reorganized, see where we have to go. And I think we have to go on a multi-decade, multi-generation tour, campaign, project of getting into the deep moral and philosophy of it, entertaining questions, doing events. Because here's the one thing I could tell you is that most people that are pro-abortion have really not heard the best defense of life from a moral standpoint, a biological standpoint, and a scientific standpoint. But it's going to be a battle, man. And I think you're going to end up seeing kind of red state, blue state abortion centers across the country where California is poised to make abortion a constitutional right. And you're going to see a lot of that kind of interstate travel and all that kind of stuff. So that's my prediction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie, thank you for being here, first of all, and thank you for everything that you do. I recently self-published a book on the political and social issues facing our country, and I covered a lot of the things that you touched on in your speech today, the rise of secularism in our country, how science has turned more into a religion than actual science, the assault on children in our country. My question for you is, what recommendations, if any, would you have as far as what I could do for marketing my book for someone who doesn't have a large following like yourself?
Well, you're doing a good thing here by being here. What's the name of your book?
Downfall of America.
There you go. So you got some plugs there. Look, the best piece of advice I have is do as much media as you can, show up to events, get to know people. Look, Turning Point is an overnight 10-year success story, right? Where everyone's like, wow, it's so big, so many chapters, so many students, so much influence, all this. And look, by the grace of God, we've grown amazingly. But for those of you that were around, remember 5 or 6 years of a lot of scrappiness and a lot of hustle and a lot of events and red-eye flights, and it's just you got to put in the work, right? And then everyone's like, wow, it happened to them so quickly. Okay, 330 days on the road for 10 years straight, right? Yeah. And then you might have a chance to build something where you can get the word out. I'm not saying you have to do that, but that's what we did. We were on the road 310, 315, 320, 335 days for a decade. And then you finally have something that, has been pretty beautiful and awesome and big and lots of staff and 130,000 donors across the country. It's amazing. And praise God, but you got to put in the work. God bless you. Thank you. Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you.
Can I give you a
Yeah,
copy
sure.
of the book?
You can go right now. Thank you. Love it. Thank you, man. God bless you. Thank you. And if you disagree, I just want to say it again. You can come. Thank you.
Hey, Charlie. I've noticed in my life and, with the political situation and the culture in the world that a lot of people are kind of, say, black-pilled as a way of saying it. Like, they've completely fallen into despair. And I noticed myself, I was depressed like my entire life until I realized the core of it was I was an angry, resentful person. Wow. So my question is, and I learned that from Jordan Peterson in the story of Cain and Abel in the Bible. And I was wondering, what ways could, me personally, because I still struggle with it, and other people, like how can we prevent ourselves from falling into this kind of angry, resentful feeling that a lot of people I know, a lot of my peers have? Thank you.
Beautiful question, truly. First thing is gratitude. Gratitude is the fruit that makes all of the things taste sweet. We have the most ungrateful generation in American history because we've taught them ingratitude. You go to most American college campuses, they get a degree in ingratitude. And if you go through the process of being thankful for something, eventually your mind will go and hopefully will say, thankful to whom? And that's important too. So I'm a big believer that the 10 Commandments were given to us as a way not just to prevent against our nature, but make us happier and allow us to flourish. And I believe the 10 Commandments are instruction manuals for individuals and society. And the one that I just harp on for young people in particular, and this is one that they don't like to hear, is honor your mother and father. It is the only one of the 10 Commandments. It's the only one of the 10 Commandments that involves your nation and a promise. Because it's not honor your mother and father. It's honor your mother and father so that you may live long in the land of which you are in. Now that word honor is very interesting. You are not commanded to love your parents. It does say that in the New Testament, but in the 10 Commandments it does not say that. It doesn't have to say you have to be your parent's friend. Now that word honor comes from a Hebrew word, the stem of it, which means heavy. You must treat them heavily. And I say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, here's a better way to explain it. The Hebrew word for curse is the word light. So if you were to curse something, you would treat them lightly or not seriously. What the Bible is commanding you is to take your parents seriously, is to take that relationship with heaviness, with intent. Of course, you might have the worst parents in the history of the world. They're abusive, they're awful. Those are very, very few exceptions. It is not okay to dishonor your parents or treat them lightly if you don't get along with them. That's not an excuse. I believe, this is just a side note, that if you cannot honor your earthly parents, you'll not be able to honor your heavenly Father. I believe it is the earthly intermediary step to be able to honor God himself. And I think as a civilization, we've kind of turned our back on that. So kind of also the idea of cynicism and apathy. Are you a Christian?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. So we as Christians are not allowed to be cynical and apathetic. If you're secular, I have a different answer for you. But as definition as Christians, you have to be hopeful and you have to be optimistic, or else you're not a Christian. And that requires effort. It requires daily effort, where you remind yourself, we know how the story ends, that there is eternity waiting for us. There's a God who loves us, that we're born new. That changes the black pill really quickly. And the final thing I'll say with this, which is just kind of a good practice, is that this will not fix all of your problems, but I am a believer in this with young men in particular, is do not discount your physiology. What you eat, whether you do drugs, whether you do alcohol, how much you sleep, how much are you consuming of screens? Do you understand how dangerous dopamine addiction and dopamine deficiencies can be? It won't fix everything because deep down it is a soul problem, but God gave us 3 parts. And we talk about the mind and rational arguments, and we talk about the spirit, but sometimes I think we as Christians do not focus on the body at all. And there's so much that if you have the posture of alignment, that if you take care of your body, you say, I'm not going to drink anymore, I'm not going to do drugs, I'm going to not watch pornography, right? I'm not going to stare at my screen 10 hours a day, I'm going to eat right and exercise. All of a sudden, you're going to take your spiritual health more seriously. And then with it comes into alignment. So I'm a big believer that your physiology could be a big driver towards staying away from cynicism and apathy. God bless you, man. Thanks for being here.
God bless you too.
Hey, Charlie. I just want to first issue how offended I am at you having the audacity, the gall to confuse Kansas City, Kansas with Kansas City, Missouri. We are better.
I knew it was coming.
We are
great.
better. We came first. We have a Super Bowl winning team.
That's
so
true.
I just want to make clear that you're in Missouri. Okay. Now that sort of brings us to the question.
Okay.
Like, in Missouri, as you know,
So
we had a
confusing.
trigger law. So we essentially don't have abortions in Missouri. So we have a lot of new parents who ostensibly don't feel prepared or feel ready to be parents. So the question is, what should state governments do, especially in Missouri, to try to alleviate and support these new families?
Great question. So first and foremost, I've said this to every pastor as part of TPUSA Faith and every church. The church has got to step up big time. And if we're going to talk about pro-life policies from the pulpit, we got to live out pro-life practices in the streets and with people that need help. And we have to offer help and aid, pregnancy resources. There should not be a child in America that gets born post-Roe where a mom feels as if she's not supported and prayed for and have things supplied to her. I believe the church will step up. I really do. But we need pastors to be clear about it and churches to really embark on that. The second thing is state governments have to make the process of adoption less bureaucratic while having the safeguards in place to not allow child abusers and bad people to be able to adopt children, which is a very real concern. I understand that. But let's just look at the numbers. One of the propaganda techniques of the abortionists, they say there will be unwanted children. There are 1 million abortions every single year. Currently, there's 2 million families on the adoption waiting list in America. So there are twice as many families waiting to adopt in America than there are abortions every single year. And I believe that number would go to 5 million and 6 million if American Christians were challenged from the pulpit, say, hey, if you have the capacity, if you have the ability, adopt one child to help us live out what we believe, that all human life is made in the image of God. That's even beyond state governments. I think the state government, though, needs to make it easier to have children. I think that we need to have a whole pro-life agenda be put in place, and praise God for the trigger law. But I don't think it's enough to just say, okay, abortion is gone and we turn our back on it. We got to live out the pro-life policies in everything we do.
If you'll humor a follow-up question.
Really quick, because we're running out of time.
So you mentioned mainly about church,
Yep.
what religious organizations should do to support new families, and you mentioned adoption.
Yes, that's
sorry,
right.
Freudian slip there. What do you think of, say, Missouri's new bill in the House that will expand Medicaid protection to pregnant women? Do you think there should be more financially on the financial level to support these new families?
Yeah, I'd have to look at it. I'm a bigger believer, if necessary, instead of doing Medicaid, which is government health insurance, I'm a bigger believer in doing what Milton Friedman would argue, which is if you're going to give aid, give it in a form of universal basic income to a very specific group. I think that gives more agency and more choice. Milton Friedman was a big believer in that. Government insurance through Medicaid is awful. It's like the worst. Medicaid can save people's lives, but the quality is low, and there's tons of fraud and a lot of inefficiencies. I have to look at the bill there. But I do think, I believe this, there is a potential role for the state to step up to make it easier for babies to be able to flourish and live post-Roe. I do believe that. Thank you. God bless you.
Hi. This is on the abortion topic as well. Would you say 70% of Americans think abortion's okay up to a certain point?
I think that's probably right.
Okay. So personally, I am pro-life. I think life begins at conception. But I think we are a small minority. And I'm almost to the point where to do something, I would give in to a certain number of weeks. I know Lindsey Graham said 15, and to me, one day doesn't make you human and the next day you're not, it's just an embryo and a fetus. It's just a stage of life. It's all life. Mm-hmm. If you, today, and maybe not in the future, and I think part of it is people that are in favor of abortion don't really realize what it is. When you say, do you know they rip your arms? I don't want to hear about it. They don't want to acknowledge what it is. Is there a week or a day that you would concede so that we don't have,
Yeah, so I would
term?
agree in a step towards the goal of abolition, right? I mean, I think if there was a 14-week ban, great first step, but I'll never not be clear the goal is complete and total abolition. I'm not going to back away from that. But do I think a 14-week ban would be a beautiful thing? Of course, obviously, especially versus the late-term nonsense we see in a lot of these states. But without a vision, people perish. and abortion is a crime against humanity, and I'm not going to back away from
Yeah.
that.
So
So
you'd-
I know
So
you.
you'd agree you'd give a little.
Of course, yeah. I mean, you got to be
make some
prudent, right?
progress.
You got to be realistic.
Yeah.
But I'm also not going to act as if the movement's over and we're going to stop campaigning, we're going to stop, persuading. But it would be imprudent not to take progress, right? Even though you have a broader goal in mind. So of course,
All right.
God
Thank
bless
you.
you. Thank you.
Hi. So you mentioned earlier, I have kind of a maybe complicated question. I agree with some of the points you made, and I kind of disagree. You mentioned earlier something about like the love yourself movement is just really bad. And I would say I agree with like a lot of self-reflection and like gives so much anxiety and depression to our generation because it's all just like me all the time. But at the same time, like, do you feel like there's a balance between loving yourself? Because I know that's helped me and that's helped many people be more comfortable with themselves and not have anxiety and have more, comfortability with the people around them and themselves. Like, do you feel like there's like, you have to be extreme one way or another, or like there's...
I'm glad it helped you. That's awesome. But I don't think we should teach it to our children, right? So I'll give you an example. If a poster said something like, in a 4th grade classroom, "You're perfect the way you are." Do you think that's a good message? Like, what would your opinion? Just think about it for a second.
I disagree with that, no.
You disagree with it?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, you and me both, right? We agree. Because to tell a 4th grader you're perfect the way you are, why would they go to school, right? Like, why would they keep on
for sure.
studying and why would they keep on improving? Now, what you're getting at, though, is being gentle towards oneself and not being harsh on oneself. That's different than self-love, because I'm a big believer in self-respect. And that's completely different than self-love. I always want to make sure I have respect towards myself. Self-love is narcissism. Self-respect is I don't want to do a series of behaviors or choices where I might look at myself in the mirror and say, I'm not happy the way I acted. Does that make sense? So self-love can get into hyper-Eastern infatuation with your own being and the energy within, which if it helps you, praise God. I know it's helped a lot of people. But I don't think we should teach our children that. I think it could do a lot more damage than good. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you.
I'm wondering, what do you think is the most important message that can come from the Hispanic community towards both parties?
Thank you for being here. I think Hispanics need to yell from the rooftops that we're not going to put up with white liberal domination of American society. And I say white liberal intentionally because there is a disproportionate amount of the nonsense that just is venom in our society from a small group of white liberals that tell Hispanic and black people that they must live a certain way. And so the one thing I would love to see the Hispanic community do is reassert itself as being a parents' movement, loving their children, and traditional values. I would love to see kind of that opposition movement, and both parties, this is what I would love to see Hispanics say, is stop taking our culture as if it's something for your own political purposes. I don't think conservatives are doing that at all. I think that liberals do it all the time. They think they own Hispanics. They think they control them. They think they can tell them what to do. They use it as political footballs all the time. And I want Hispanics to say, you know what? You don't own us, actually. We're our own community, and we love our children. We love God. We love hard work. We love the police, and you don't represent us. That's what I'd love to see from the Hispanic community. Really quick. We're running out of time.
It comes across very condescending and arrogant, and it comes across as if we're not capable of doing things.
I agree. God bless you. We'll go a little overtime if you guys want me to, because I screwed up the states. So.
I want you to go overtime. Are you familiar with Christopher Hitchens?
Yeah, the atheist.
Okay,
yeah.
so Christopher Hitchens' statement is that while religion may occasionally make bad people do good things, if you want to get good people to do bad things, you use religion. How would you respond to that?
So, do you hold that view, or just curious?
Yes.
Oh, you do? Okay. Well, what is good?
Well, anything that benefits people. I mean, I'm not.
Okay,
really
but
I don't really have a cogent definition of good, but there are certainly plenty of examples where religious differences have been leveraged to create horrendous atrocities.
Yeah, just the question is, what is horrendous and what is good, right? So, absent a belief in God, how do you have a definition of good?
What benefits mankind?
So Stalin was an atheist who went to seminary, denounced God,
Yep.
killed 40 million people, but who's to say they're wrong? They said they were benefiting humanity.
Well, I think you can make that. You can argue against that based on using science.
How?
Well, the more diversity you have, the more likely you are to survive.
What? No, I don't quite understand. No, I'm curious.
Okay.
Like, but
So,
by eliminating diversity.
so evolution is descent through modification and survival of the fittest. So the more genetic variation you have, the more likely you are to develop at least some part of that population that would be able to withstand any sort of environmental change. So genocides, I think from a scientific standpoint, you can't use science to support that.
Okay, so then why was there a lot of literature supporting eugenics?
'Cause people are stupid.
Oh, I agree, right. So, but then, so you're saying science, okay, so that's an interesting question. So you think Darwinism can support an agreed upon
What's Darwinism? Because Darwin never used the
origin
term
of
Darwinism.
species? Like his,
Okay, but that's not Darwinism, that's evolution.
okay, so how about the moral idea that the survival of the fittest?
Well, it's not really a moral idea, it's a kind of a fact.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So I kind
Now,
of get,
but you can make the case that, so I think there are people who would say, well, if you have people who are sort of have genetic defects, that they shouldn't be allowed to survive, and I think that's horrendous.
but why? Why do you have that belief?
Again, this idea behind genetic diversity.
Yeah, but if someone has a low IQ, aren't they kind of just like a strain on society? Why wouldn't we eliminate them?
You can't predict on the basis certainly of IQ.
No, sure we can. We do it all the time. We do chromosomal testing. I mean, in Iceland, they've gotten rid of kids with
Right,
Down syndrome.
And
Do you agree with that?
again, no.
Why?
Because those folks with Down syndrome lead full lives that are
Well,
helpful
no, hold
to
on.
other
No,
people.
they require someone to support them. So shouldn't we eliminate them?
Not all of them.
Why?
Yeah,
by
not
what
all
mo-
of them.
hold on,
Down
by-
syndrome is a spectrum.
But
It's not simply a trisomy 21. It's a lot more complicated.
I'm getting at a point here, which eventually it's going to be your opinion versus mine of what is good.
Okay, but I think you can qualify good scientifically.
Right, but the scientific good in Iceland is Down syndrome are a strain on the environment, strain on resources. They're unproductive. They can't produce. So we might as well eliminate them, right?
Well, I would say that's a mistake. They don't.
But their scientists disagree. So by what standard is good
Well,
good?
Who are their scientists?
The international world community is doing this. Let me ask you another question, though. Do you believe in the Big Bang?
Yes.
So you believe that time, space, and matter had a definitive beginning?
Yes.
Okay, so by definition, shouldn't therefore the thing that caused time, space, and
No.
matter be outside of time, space, and matter?
No, that's a.
So you don't believe in Newtonian physics?
No, actually, I don't. I believe more in quantum physics because.
Okay, so you don't believe for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction?
Newtonian physics works well on large scales, but
Yeah, the universe is pretty large, dude. Like,
wait, the Big Bang rests on quantum mechanics.
not applied by Newtonian physics because it's the largest possible scale imaginable? So how exactly did the Big Bang happen if there wasn't someone that effectuated the Big Bang?
Okay, so it's a bit complicated. It has to do with quantum. No, I'm not saying.
No, it's actually not. It's that the only thing that could have made something that is space, time, and matter is something that transcends space, time, and matter, aka a God. That's the only explanation.
So much for your work. I'll just ask two quick questions. As a passionate Christian and patriot, and just I would say an everyday Joe that I am, businesswoman, churchgoer, I feel intimidated and discouraged so many times seeing the power of our culture. As you said, on every Starbucks or the social media, everywhere we go, there's this Goliath in our face. And I just wanted to see if you could empower all of us with just some points as a Gideon's army on how we can continue to take a stand for conservatism. And if Turning Point has, my juices are so stirred and I'm so excited that I want to be able to answer transgenderism. I haven't studied all of the points, but does your organization have something where we can learn how to be effective in really responding to this?
Yeah, and I got to kind of hat tip the experts. I got to tell you, Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman, is one of the best pieces of film. Is that not the greatest thing? And I don't pretend to be the leading voice on that topic because I have to carry, we do radio, so I have to talk about 100 issues a day. But I really encourage you. His podcast is great, And I think he's done more scholarship on this issue in a persuasive, entertaining way than almost anybody else. So I would point you in that direction. And also, don't give up hope.
Yeah.
We got the truth. Have courage. Courage is the ultimate virtue. Without courage, there are no other virtues. And I'll tell you, I think our best days are ahead in that way. God bless you. Thank you. Next question. Is this the final question? Yes, final question. Okay.
Best for last. But my question is, I debate often with people of color that look like me that they shouldn't support like BLM and all that nonsense. So no, they haven't accepted my ideals. So what would be the best counter argument for them to just stop supporting defunding police or reparations or things like that?
Are those popular arguments you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, first, are you a conservative?
I'm a Christian. Yes, I'm a
God
conservative.
bless you, man. Thank you. And that's I want to say that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I can imagine you received some ridicule for those positions.
Yeah.
What are you called?
Transphobe. Well, and definitely in high school, I came out as a Christian, so I would people started debating me on my how I believed, and it was just I would set up these debates, and it would just be awful. Like I'd be called a bunch of names. It never affected me much, but it was just so interesting to see their rhetoric not have a civil discourse with me. So
Yes.
yeah.
So I look, I would say this, that I would focus on, if talking to other Black Americans, I would ask them, I'd say, has the reign of white liberals since 1960s benefit our community? Forget all this systemic racism stuff. You guys want to talk about racism? How about the reign of white liberals that Malcolm X warned us about? Great Society program, woke ideology, destruction of our family. They want to play the race card all the time. Who's been in charge of black cities the last 60 years? It's not rural farmers in western Kansas or Missouri. Instead, it's been white liberals. It's been a project of the white liberal and for the white liberal. And it's hyper-academic ideology, abstractions. And here's the one thing I would say, which is, try to be real. This is one of the reasons why I think that Black America is going to have a conservative renaissance at some point, is that these ideas require you at times to go through to get a PhD. They're so insane. Men can become pregnant. America's systemically racist. You know when you walk the streets in the cities, you're like, actually, we could use more cops. You don't have to go listen to some sort of abstract thinker about why police systemic racism, all that nonsense. So just be real. Talk about things that matter. In Black America, you talk about how we need a restoration of nuclear families and ask the question, why is this the case? It's because of the reign of terror of white liberals. It's not white conservatives. It's not those MAGA semi-fascist people. No. It is the ideology of the woke that has imposed themselves on Black America. If that's really they want to go, I'll tell you, they've done more damage than any other community, and I think you could turn it on them. God bless you for being here tonight, man. Thank you. All right, well, that was fun, wasn't it?